Hello everyone, my name is Patrick Hayes, and in this video we will be working on Lillian Fuchs's Fantasy Etude number 14, which was selected as one of this year's All-State Etudes. We'll be diving into some of the musical concepts that she was composing with and that we get to experience as the player, and we will also go chunk by chunk through the rest of the Etude together. I hope that I can provide some helpful advice for your practice, and by the end of the video I hope that you can just feel a little bit more confident in how to approach this very challenging etude. Let's get started. I want you to think of some words that come to mind as you are listening to this etude. How does it make you feel? Here's the first phrase of our piece of music, starting on just measure 1. Okay, that was just measures 1 through 8. And as I'm playing it, and as I am hearing it, I think of words like uncertainty. I think of words like lost, meandering. And there's a reason why we experience the piece in this way, and there's a reason why those types of words come up. And it's how I want to begin this video, talking about 2 musical concepts that we really get to experience and discover as we're working on this etude together, and most definitely as we are performing this etude when the time comes for your audition. Okay? And the words that these 2 musical concepts go by are diatonic and chromatic. So when we're talking about notes that are diatonic, we're talking about notes that belong in a key. So for example, if we're thinking about the key of G major, a way that we can experience all of the notes that are diatonic in G major is to play a G major scale. And that will reveal all the notes that are diatonic. So we have G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. And just so our ears don't go crazy, I'll finish out the scale. All of those notes are the ones that are what we call diatonic to the key. And it's because of this kind of musical sense of belonging that we refer to them as diatonic. Now, you don't just play scales that are diatonic, you can also build melodies using those notes. For example, Mozart and his melody in Eine kleine Nachtmusik used these G major notes to build his melody. I'm sure you all have kind of heard this melody. Right? Of course, he didn't write just a scale. He took those notes and put them in different orders, and he put them in different rhythms, but what he produced was a very diatonic melody because he was using diatonic notes that all belonged to the key of G major. On the other hand, we can describe notes as being chromatic. And the word chromatic comes from the Greek word meaning color. These are notes that are not a part of the main key signature or part of the main key, and because of this they add a little bit of pizzazz, or they add some flavor to our melody and the music that we're making. A way to experience chromatic notes is, maybe you've played one yourself, is to play a chromatic scale. Right? And it kind of has this tumbling, cartoonish type vibe when we're playing a chromatic scale. But chromatic scales don't belong to a specific key because they contain notes of every key, right? We had A flats and A naturals, B flats and B naturals, C naturals and C sharps, all in one scale. So chromatic notes are ones that are outside of our kind of key signature party, but because of them being a little bit different from the main key, they add a lot of nice character to our melody. When we are playing this Fuchs, I think it's a wonderful way to experience these two concepts. And there are two concepts that I really want you walking away from your time in the practice room spent with this etude really understanding, right? There are moments in this etude that feel diatonic. It feels like we kind of have a home note that our music is wanting to orbit around. But we also have moments that are extremely chromatic, where our notes are meandering a little bit more. We're not quite certain of where our home note is because she's taking us to different places. And so I think that's the challenge of this etude, is to balance these two concepts and do it with skill and do it with a sense of musicality as well. I also want to point out that the title itself kind of suggests opposing forces. Now, we'll never know truly what Ms. Fuchs meant when she was writing the titles to each of these etudes, but I think we can still glean some things from it. Here we have written aria parlante. An aria is, of course, a genre where our soloists on the operatic stage are singing their hearts out, right? They're revealing something that's kind of inside of them, or they're revealing something really emotionally important. And then we have the word parlante, which is meaning essentially to speak. And those two don't quite go together, right? How can we sing speech and how can we speak a song, right? So there's a little bit of opposing forces there. And just like diatonic and chromatic music is opposing, I think that Ms. Fuchs is really setting up this challenge for us as violists. How to balance this? How can we balance all of these kind of differing elements in our music? And it's wonderful work to be able to do as a student of our instrument. Now let's start working through the etude itself, right? In the very beginning, we want to start with our bow maybe somewhere around the midpoint. And our dynamic is marked piano, and we have a character word of espressivo, right, which just means expressive. So we want to start around here, maybe a little bit closer to the fingerboard so that we can get a sound that is expressing this kind of lost character that I feel is what the music is suggesting. So there's some really lovely chromatic notes in here. We have this A flat, followed by a G sharp. We have the high C sharp later. Lots of chromatic notes, and there's others that I encourage you to find in here. What I think technically that means for you as a player is these are the notes that give us flavor, right? These are the sprinkles. And so we want to make sure that we're playing them with vibrato. And we want to make sure that we are leaning on these notes that have the little tenuto mark as well, okay? So go through, make sure you are playing with lots of vibrato, that you're expressing an emotion that you feel is right for the music. and that you are controlling your bow along the way so you're able to sustain this phrase. Now, our next phrase gets quite chromatic. So let's listen to it, and then we'll talk about some ways that you can practice it as well. Okay, few general things I want to point out. Our tempo is our half note equals 50, right? With our time signature of 2-2, our main beat is our half note. We're thinking in terms of half note beats. So everything is going to feel quite slow. Put a metronome click on a quarter note rhythm that feels comfortable to you. And I think that will hold you accountable in your rhythm as well, okay? Now, how can we practice this tricky chromatic bit, right? We have C flats, we have we have G flats, we have A flats, we have lots of different chromatic moments as we span these few measures. And so it's very challenging for your ear. The first way I think that is the easiest and also extremely helpful is just to listen. On YouTube, there are tons of recordings of this etude. There's also, I think, recordings on Spotify and Apple Music as well. But for free options, there's ones on YouTube. And I think if you just listen to it regularly, maybe a couple times a week, this etude is not very long, it's just a few minutes. And if you listen to it with focus, right? You're not watching TV, you're not, talking to your family, talking to your friends, but you really are just sitting down with your music in front of you, and you take 3 minutes to listen through the whole piece. It will start to be kind of memorized in your ear so that you understand how this melody should flow. So sitting and listening attentively with your music is a wonderful way to practice. Another way that you can practice is to change the octave, right? For those of you that aren't quite comfortable reading in treble clef, then I think this is a great way to practice your treble clef literacy as well, right? We have these notes that go quite high. Starting at measure 11, we have an E flat followed by the B flat, C flat, and A flat. And we're up in this octave. If we can jump down the octave, it's a little easier to play, and it gives our ear a chance to listen in a different register. You can even take it down one more octave. And if you're getting a little stuck in the bow, you can do separate bows. Really enjoying the intonation of this section, all that chromatic intonation. Now, when you feel comfortable with playing it in a lower register, you can also move it back up and try to match that sound. So, for example, this might be how you practice. match it to the upper octave. Another way to practice is to sing it, right? It does not matter how good your singing voice is. Singing is a wonderful way to get our ear actively involved in our music making. So you can take that little chunk that we just worked on and sing it. Da, da, ti, da. Maybe you get your bow arm involved, shadow bow through it. Do, da, ti, da. Then, if you feel like you can sing it away from the instrument, you can kind of play a little game with yourself. Play a note. Sing the next one. Ba, 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 ba. It's very tricky, but it is a wonderful way to really challenge yourself in your practice and to hone your ear to these very challenging chromatic parts of the melody. So we've now reached the whole note C flat in measure 16, which is going to just sound the same as B natural. And in this section, Miss Fuchs is leading us towards a moment that feels a little bit more diatonic. It feels like we're a little bit more settled and comfortable within one key. So we're playing our C flat. Like all of that music, our melody is leading us towards that lovely E flat. Our ears sense a melody that is more diatonic now. And I think she also gives us a character that matches this sound. She writes the word sensible, which means to play sensitively, right? So find a color that matches your idea of sensitivity and just enjoy this sound that's a little bit more stable in its key. So once we've reached this E flat, then Miss Fuchs kind of follows the same formula of our previous phrase. We have one measure, measure 21, that teeter-totters between these chromatic notes of F flat and our F natural. F flat is going to sound just the same as E natural. So we have that half-step motion between F flat and F natural that we go back and forth between. And then she sends our melody into more diatonic sounding notes. And instead of being centered on E flat, this next section centers itself on A flat. Okay? So we have just finished our previous phrase on that whole note E flat. Now she's taking us somewhere else. Centering whole note A flats, which feel very diatonic now, okay? As you're playing this section and you're up in this fifth position part, make sure that your left hand is not too low, that your fingers aren't reaching around the neck of the instrument, but instead, boop, that you have enough height to your fingers. They should always be curled and tunneled around so that you feel nice and free. You're not tense and reaching for any of these notes, okay? Also, this section should be played with lots of vibrato. Remember, she wrote the word sensitive or sensible. And to play without vibrato, to me, doesn't quite feel feel as sensitive as a sound with vibrato. It's up to you. If you feel like the no vibrato sound feels kind of quiet to you in a sensitive way, then go for it. Just make sure you're doing it intentionally, that you're not doing it randomly and you're just vibrating some notes and forgetting to vibrate others. No, you need to have a plan. Make sure that your music sounds intentional, right? Not random. Now, the lovely thing is once you've reached measure 26, you have learned over half of this etude, right? Measure 1 through 26 is identical to measure 27 through 52. Okay, so you've done a really, really big chunk of work once you've learned these first few lines. So I'm just going to start at measure 27 and play through this next chunk. And if you want to play with me, I encourage you to do so. 1 and 2 and. So our next phrase begins at measure 53, and make sure that you're still paying attention to a gluey bow, right? That you're not running out of bow at the end of these slurs, but instead really sustaining beautiful, sensitive sound on each of these half notes. Right? We want to make sure we're not running out of bow. Sorry? Right? Then you get tense and stuck at the wrong part of the bow. No, really be focused on spreading your bow distribution through those half notes in an intelligent way so that you're not losing that sustained sound, okay? Another quick note I want to talk about for shifting is that just like we want to make sure we're saving a slow bow, we also want to make sure that we're shifting in a slow way. We shouldn't be shifting in this way. Sorry? Right? That doesn't quite match the mood. Instead, the shift and the speed of your shift should match the speed of your bow. Nice and together between both hands, right? A slow bow makes for a slow shift, and a slow shift makes for a slow bow, okay? We want to make sure that our shifting is always in the character rather than outside of the character. So here is our phrase. And there's a little surprise in there, right? We think that we are diatonic, like we've been discussing in this video, to the note A flat. It feels like A flat is kind of our home note. And then she surprises us with this A natural, which is chromatic. and opposes that A flat, okay? So let's talk about some ways that you can practice this surprise. One way that you can practice these subito or sudden pianos is to give yourself lots of time in between the end of the crescendo and the beginning of your next note. Here's what I mean. If we're on our up bow, starting up from the E flat in measure 53, 4, 5, measure 56. Really exaggerate the timing. And then you can slowly take away time of that gap. Okay? And so when you practice in this way, you're really making sure that you're practicing the drama of that sudden change. So after our surprise A natural, we are now diatonic in a slightly different way, but for the purposes of this video, we're diatonic still to the A natural. It feels like A natural is our home. So here's our subito piano A natural, measure 57. There's our home. Here's our home again. Here's our home again. Yet another surprise. That B flat that we had in measure 65 is not diatonic to our A, right? We feel it as a kind of chromatic surprise. And you can practice it in the same way. On that up bow G in measure 64, really work your way to a successful crescendo. Take time and set your next relaxed piano. Then you can fill in the gap. Okay, so make sure that you are practicing these surprises in an intentional way. It will make a really, really big difference in the musicality that you're portraying for the listener. By now, I hope that your ear has picked up on some repetition that has happened throughout this piece. And if not, that's okay. Let's discuss it. In the beginning, measure 1, we have this kind of rising, these rising notes in our melody. And then in measure 9, we have that same type of rising. It has almost a similar sound. We're just starting on a different note. Rather than starting on D, we're starting on G. But our phrase beginnings are related. In measure 27, we have that same beginning of phrase. And then in measure 35, we have that same beginning of phrase, just starting on a new note. In measure 53, we have a slightly different beginning of melody. And then Miss Fuchs composes with that same melodic shape in the beginning of our phrase at measure 65. That time starting on the note B flat, okay? So it's important that you are recognizing patterns in music, not just in this piece, but in any piece that you are working on. Recognizing the repetitions and the way that the music plays out helps you build a more personal relationship and a more kind of aware relationship with the piece that you are playing. So I just wanted to kind of point out that repetition and pattern that happens throughout the etude, because it also makes your ear a little bit more secure in those beginnings of your phrases, right? Sometimes when we're tense in our performance and we're a little bit nervous, our ear can almost be lost. Our brain scrambles and we're not quite sure of what to be grounded on. But if we recognize that what we're playing has essentially already happened in other measures, then it feels a little bit more secure. This measure at 68 into measure 69 is no longer a surprise, right? We don't have a subito piano that answers this crescendo, but instead we have forte, espressivo. So make sure that you're playing with lots and lots of vibrato. Here is the up bow in measure 68. Okay, so measure 69 and measure 70 is the same melody at measure 71 and 72. It's just a different octave. And then we repeat it just down an octave. Okay, so another pattern that you can be aware of. But lots of vibrato, and make sure that you're playing with a kind of gluey, intense, and sustained bow as well. In measure 70, we have the word restes written, which just means that you should remain in that position, okay? So don't scoot your way out of third position, but instead remain in third position for that whole phrase so that we can kind of have that color to our melody. Just like we discussed before, make sure that your hand is not getting low or you're reaching for those C string notes in third position, but instead you're bringing your hand around slightly, bringing the elbow of your left arm more in front so that you can have a taller hand that feels stable on these notes in third position, rather than, right, we don't want to see flat fingers. Nice, rich, warm sound. A quick note on how to play these harmonics that we have near the end of the piece and at measure 74. So as written, you're going to play at measure 74, you're going to play an open G, an open D, and then you're going to find a harmonic G on your G string, and then a harmonic D on your D string, that same harmonic G we just found, an open D, and then an open G. Way to practice this is to take out the slur. Just find your notes. Okay, that harmonic is going to have a really, really nice ring and color to it. And as you put those slurs back into the piece, then you can coordinate the string crossings with the positioning of your left hand. One more time. Okay, you can kind of just be lazy. Have your fourth finger hovering over both of those harmonic parts so that you can just plop it down and have that note ready to go and ring. After we have finished that harmonic measure, it leads us and slurs us into a recap of the piece, which just means that our melody we had at the beginning is now returning at the end. So this is music we've already played. We have up bow on our D, lots of vibrato, crescendo, and then a surprise. Instead of leading us to that D natural we had in the beginning, something has changed. We're now raising everything to go to a C sharp, which leads us into the final section of our piece. We have a poco, which means little, ritardando, slow down. We have a poco rit in that second to last measure across those harmonic notes. So take your time, and then Miss Fuchs gives us this lovely chord at the end that feels so much warmer than how we started the piece. Okay, so in that last section, we're not quite able to call D our home note, but we're much more grounded. It's not quite as chromatic as other sections of the piece, and our last chord is definitely something that's much more positive than how we began the piece as well. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope that this video was helpful, just a little bit to help you in your practice, and just know that there are so many other things that we could have talked about. So I encourage you to look online at other videos. Also look at the resources TMEA has provided for you. They have videos that are synced with music itself, and you can kind of rewind and change tempos, and there's lots of wonderful software that I'm not able to provide for you here, and wonderful teachers through that resource as well. So I encourage you to go listen to those videos and just keep practicing well. I think what Mrs. Fuchs is challenging here is she's challenging our ear with this etude, right? Through the chromatic notes, through the diatonic notes, through the sustained bowing, through the surprising elements that happen throughout this work, she's challenging our ear to always be active, right? We have to really stay involved in every single measure of this piece. We can't relax through any of it. It needs to be played with a lot of intention. And so if you're walking away from your time spent with this etude with a ear that is just a little bit stronger and a ear that is really attentively listening to the type of sound that is coming out of your viola, then I think you've practiced this in a very meaningful way, and that should be commended. So enjoy the unexpected twists of this piece. Stay curious in your practice, and enjoy this fantasy etude by Lillian Fuchs. Thank you.